Welcome. You're listening to Sons and Kings, the Psalm 2 show where we unlock the church's ancient battle cry of divine filiation and embrace the gentle kingship of Christ through the riches of the Christian tradition. Happy Tuesday. Let's begin. Welcome back to another episode of Sons and Kings, the Psalm 2 show. We're continuing our discussion of verse 2. So Pat, why don't you share that again for us?
The kings of the earth stood up, and the princes met together against the Lord and against his Christ.
Wow. Yeah, it's good. It's good. So, where do we want to start?
We were talking about this quotation from Saint Josemaria Escriva from Christ is Passing By, where he gives a commentary on this verse. He says, you see, nothing new. People opposed Christ, the Anointed, even before he was born. They opposed him as he went his peaceable way along the roads of Palestine. They persecuted him and continued to do so by attacking the members of his real and mystical body. Why so much hatred? Why are people so easily taken in? Why this universal smothering of the freedom of every conscience? And so he takes this verse, when he's interpreting it in a moral sense, to say that the way we experience this attack by the kings of the earth and the princes is an attack on the freedoms of conscience, on our ability to really follow what we believe in and to live, to transform our society in a positive way, right? He says that, that freedom to really transform your society or to follow your conscience and to live it well is being persecuted. And that's how he reads this, at least in this instance, reads this verse of the Psalm.
Nice. So, freedom of conscience. Is that what the expression you used was?
Yeah, that's the...
This is sort of like the strategy, so to speak, is to smother freedom of conscience.
That's right.
And so, what do we mean by that?
Yeah, and I was talking earlier is that, and I think in a place that somebody, fact check this, quote this, but Saint Josemaria talks about this difference and this distinction between freedom of conscience and freedom of consciences with an S. And this freedom of conscience is this true freedom, right? Not kind of this like esoteric liberty or license, right, to do anything. That's a false freedom. But the freedom of conscience as a person, everyone has this freedom to choose the good. And that actually is so needed, right? Because it's out of the freedom to choose the good that we're able to love. And you see like some of the temptation of the world really, and I love how Saint Josemaria kind of, speaks this out. Really these, even in a spiritual way, they're trying to quash the ability for true love in the world. Because Christ is love. God is love, as we read in the letters of John. And so these kings of the earth, right? Practically speaking, these kings who are trying during the life of Christ to take Christ's life physically, right, to end his life through killing all the children under the age of 2. These people who are, obviously all the way through Christ's entire journey to the point where they crucify him, they're killing love and the capacity for people to really choose this authentic love. So this freedom of conscience is not kind of, and I think it's really important for a note, is not a freedom of license, but a freedom of love. And the world, and even the false comforts of the world that may say this is love, this comfort, this enjoyment you have in the moment is some type of love. Often that is not the true love, right? That God brings us, that God is as love.
All right, we found a quote from Tertullian in Against the Nations. When he said, "Men overcome their hatred when their ignorance is overcome." And actually, St. Josemaria commented on that quote from Tertullian when he was talking about Psalm 2. He said, "Ignorance is the greatest enemy of our faith, and at the same time, the greatest obstacle to achieving the redemption of souls." And so when we talk about conscience, right, and our own conscience, and how do we, like, in a sense, combat our own tendency, in a sense, toward hatred? We are made for love, but then we kind of tend sometimes to love self and hate, everything else, so to speak. And so, we have an obligation to form our conscience. We have an obligation, and that's where, like, it's not a freedom of conscience is, right, to do whatever you want, right? But you have also a responsibility with that freedom to form yourself, to educate yourself in the truths of the faith, in morality, in knowing what God's will is, writ large, as well as for your own life, and then kind of making these decisions accordingly. And it seems like that's a great, in a sense, response to this, like, allure of the world that we've been talking about, and the sort of the attack of the kings, of the princes, those, like, united in malice against uh you know God and his Christ, is okay. What do I need to do? I need to know more. I need to learn more. I need to study the faith, study morality. Why does a church teach this about this and that about that? Is kind of like a strategy that we could take.
Yeah, you could even think of these kings of the earth as like, again, we're like, we're praying with this, right? In a sense. So, but as like these ideologies of the world
Hmm.
that also engender ignorance in people in different ways. And in order to really combat that, it's the same thing. These ideologies are laid against Christ, uh, the Lord, and for us to combat the ideologies, we have to grow in our knowledge of God, the things of God, and the teaching of the church, especially as it relates to things that the worldly ideologies will kind of be attempting to, misconstrue and things like that. So I think, especially for people, folks who are lay people in the world, it's important to kind of learn obviously the catechism, but also the church's doctrine on social issues. Compendium of the social doctrine of the church, which to me is the church in its wisdom through the moral theology attempts to kind of you could say combat these kings of the earth, these ideologies of the world. And as Pope Benedict XVI talks about, faith purifies reason. It kind of is like through in taking in this moral theology and reading more about our faith and learning more about what the church teaches, it purifies us from like these kings of the earth that kind of come into us, right, into our minds, and helps us to stand really alongside Christ and his mission in the world.
Yeah, that reminds me of this argument that Socrates makes in his dialogue, and Plato's dialogue, the Protagoras. He says that, the only reason we choose evil is because we don't realize in the long term how much it's going to hurt us. And he makes it a problem of knowledge, the reality that we choose evil, which, I think there may be some problems with that conclusion, but I think it's true that we often do the wrong thing because we don't really understand how bad it is for us, that it goes against our nature and it's going to make us unhappy. And I really like this quote from Tertullian in this context that, once you understand, then you will no longer hate. And in fact, it seems to be the recommendation of the psalmist. We're not there yet, but his instruction or his command, or the final injunction to the kings is to receive instruction, to learn the precepts. And that's the solution to the rage or to the assisting in the rage. And this verse too is, it's paralleled by the instruction they're going to receive at the end of the psalm.
So I want to end with one last idea from Saint Josemaria. This is very relevant to this topic. When he was meditating on Psalm 2, he kind of likened it to the parable of the farmer, or I don't know exactly what it's called, but
The sower and the seed.
well, that one is like, it's a little
I
different.
see.
This is the so the landowner has planted crops. He's wanting to have a great harvest, but then the weeds grow up, and the servants are saying, "Hey, where did, like, these weeds come from?" And the landowner, in his wisdom, the farmer, he says, "Well, an enemy has done this, right? We didn't plant the weeds in the garden, in the fields. And when did that happen?" Saint Josemaria says, "When good men were sleeping."
Mm.
And I think the Latin from that scripture is "cum autem dormerent homines," like when good men were sleeping. And so, like, he kind of comments on this, how there's this sort of an evil drowsiness when good men are complacent, right? And maybe you've heard this quote, all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing, right? And so when the good men, so to speak, were complacent and not really vigilant, this is where the bad ideas were sown. This is where the ignorance, rises, because good men are not on the attack. And so, kind of just I guess it's an exhortation for vigilance. And we'll continue this discussion next time of verse 2.
Why this tumult among nations, among peoples this useless murmuring? They arise, the kings of the earth. Princes plot against the Lord and his anointed. Come, let us break their fetters. Come, let us cast off their yoke. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord is laughing them to scorn. Then he will speak in his anger. His rage will strike them with terror. It is I who have set up my king on Zion, my holy mountain. I will announce the decree of the Lord said to me, you are my son. It is I who have begotten you this day. Ask, and I shall bequeath to you the nations. Put the ends of the earth in your possession. With a rod of iron you will break them, shatter them like a potter's jar. Now, O kings, understand. Take warning, rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with awe and trembling. Pay him your homage, lest he be angry and you perish, for suddenly his anger will blaze. Blessed are they who put their trust in God.
Hey, this is Jake. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Sons and Kings, the Psalm 2 show. We're really glad that you joined us today. We hope you got something out of it. And if you did, I'd love to invite you to share with a friend, or even just like or subscribe to the platform. It really helps us to get the message out to more people, help more people with the show. Thank you again, and we'll see you in the next episode.